The ivory tower. The champagne flowed like liquid gold across crystal flutes as servers in immaculate white glided through the Reed Mansion's grand ballroom. Tonight marked 15 years of marriage between Oliver Reed and his wife Josephine, though few would guess they were celebrating a union from the distance between them. Oliver stood tall near the center of the room, his custom Brioni suit and perfectly groomed salt and pepper hair projecting the image he'd crafted over 2 decades, from coding in a garage to becoming the 45-year-old founder of Quantum Sphere Technologies. His booming laugh drew people like moths to flame, each hoping to bask in the warm glow of his attention and perhaps his investment portfolio. The Taiwan deal closed this morning, he announced to his circle of admirers, mostly business associates and potential investors. Another billion added to the company valuation. He didn't mention that Josephine had called 3 times during that meeting, calls he had silenced without a second thought. Across the room, Josephine Reed smoothed down her emerald gown, a designer piece that felt more like armor than celebration attire. At 42, she retained the graceful beauty that had once caught Oliver's eye at a university art exhibition, where she'd been the featured student artist. That seemed like another lifetime now. "You should display your work again, Joe," said Rebecca, one of the few genuine friends she'd maintained. "Your watercolors were magical." Josephine's smile didn't reach her eyes. That was before. "Oliver needs me focused on our social obligations and charity boards." What she didn't say was how she'd spent months developing a proposal for a community art center in the struggling neighborhood where she'd grown up. How she'd researched costs, impact studies, and educational outcomes, compiling everything into a presentation she hoped would finally interest her husband in something that mattered to her. "I'm going to speak with him about it tonight," she confided to Rebecca. "He promised to consider funding my project after the Taiwan deal closed." Rebecca squeezed her hand but couldn't hide her skepticism. Later, as the evening reached its peak, Josephine approached Oliver during a rare moment when his entourage had thinned. "Oliver, do you have a moment? I'd love to discuss the proposal I sent you." He barely glanced her way. "What proposal?" "The community art center, remember? You said after the Taiwan deal." "Ah, that." He took another sip of his drink. I glanced at it. "Hardly seems worth the investment," she lowered her voice. "It would bring arts education to hundreds of underprivileged children. The same kind of children we once were." Something hardened in Oliver's expression. "Perhaps you've forgotten that I've worked too hard to remember being that child." "This is important to me," she persisted, her voice trembling slightly. Oliver turned to face her fully now, irritation flashing across his features. Unfortunately, the nearby conversations had quieted just enough that his next words carried farther than intended. "Important? It's a hobby, Josephine. A frivolous distraction. I deal with projects that move markets, not watercolor classes for sentiment's sake." The sudden silence felt suffocating. Josephine stood frozen as tears welled in her eyes. Oliver, realizing they had an audience, laughed dismissively. "My wife, always the dreamer," he announced to the onlookers. "One of us has to keep our feet on the ground, don't we?" The polite titters that followed cut through Josephine like glass. 15 years of support, compromise, and slowly disappearing within her husband's shadow crystallized in that moment of public humiliation. As conversations resumed and Oliver turned back to his associates, Josephine quietly slipped away from the celebration of a marriage that she now realized had ended long before tonight. Shattered reflections, the morning light filtered through the mansion's imposing windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Josephine moved quietly through the master suite, placing selected items into a single suitcase. Her movements were deliberate, methodical, the actions of a woman who had made a difficult decision after a sleepless night. She paused at the antique vanity where she'd prepared for countless galas and fundraisers. The woman in the reflection seemed like a stranger, her eyes rimmed red but oddly clear, as though seeing truly for the first time in years. The household staff kept their eyes averted as she descended the grand staircase. Henderson, their butler of 12 years, broke protocol to speak. "Mrs. Reed, is there anything I can assist you with?" Josephine offered him a gentle smile. "Not this time, Henderson. Thank you for everything." She left no note. The empty spaces in her closet, the missing photographs, and the returned wedding rings placed carefully on Oliver's desk would speak volumes. Across town, Delia Franklin flipped the closed sign on her bookstore. "Forgotten Classics," to welcome her oldest friend. The cozy apartment above the shop was modest, a universe away from the Reed estate. But as Delia unlocked the door, it felt more like a sanctuary than a step down. "It's small," Delia apologized, helping with the suitcase. "It's perfect," Josephine replied, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in years. Meanwhile, Oliver sat in his corner office overlooking the Seattle skyline, barely registering the panoramic view as Thomas Mitchell, his CFO and oldest friend, delivered unwelcome news. The ethics committee is raising concerns about the labor conditions in the Singapore facility. The press is starting to ask questions. Oliver waved dismissively. "Handle it. That's what our PR department is for." Thomas hesitated. "There's also the matter of Josephine." Henderson called. "She'll come back," Oliver interrupted, not looking up from his monitor. "She always does." "I don't think so. Not this time." Thomas's voice carried a warning. "You went too far, Oliver." For a brief moment, something like doubt flickered across Oliver's face before his expression hardened again. She knew who she married. "I didn't build this empire by coddling feelings, hers or anyone else's." Thomas placed a folder on the desk. "The quarterly projections." "And Oliver? Sometimes the most expensive things we lose aren't measured in dollars." Left alone, Oliver reached for his phone, scrolling to Josephine's contact. His thumb hovered over the call button before he set it down. Pride still outweighed regret, but a creeping emptiness had begun to settle into the corners of his life, an emptiness his wealth couldn't fill. In the apartment above Forgotten Classics, Josephine unpacked her art supplies, handling brushes she hadn't touched in years. Each felt both foreign and familiar in her hands. "When was the last time you painted?" Delia asked, setting down tea on the small table. "Almost 8 years," Josephine answered, running her fingers over a wooden palette. "I kept telling myself I was just busy, that I'd get back to it." Then one day, Oliver referred to my studio as the guest room we never use, and I realized I'd been slowly disappearing. Delia nodded. "So what now?" Josephine looked out the window at the vibrant street below, watching as a group of children drew with chalk on the sidewalk in front of the neighboring community center. "Now," she said with quiet determination, "I stopped disappearing." Seeds of revival. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons, each day adding color to Josephine's new life. The apartment above Forgotten Classics had transformed. Canvases leaned against walls, paintbrushes stood in jars by the window, and the scent of oils and acrylics perfumed the air. Josephine stood back from her latest work, a large canvas depicting children releasing paper lanterns into a night sky. The piece had been inspired by the art classes she'd begun teaching at the local community center, a volunteer position that had quickly become the highlight of her week. "Ms. Josie, is this right?" 8-year-old Daniel held up a watercolor wash, his forehead creased with concentration. "It's beautiful," she assured him, guiding his hand gently. "Art isn't about right or wrong. It's about expressing what you feel." The classroom buzzed with the energy of 15 children, most from families who couldn't afford formal art education. Watching them create filled a void in Josephine she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. After class, Vincent Cortez, owner of the Prismatic Gallery 3 blocks away, waited by the door. At 58, with silver-streaked black hair and paint-stained hands, he had become both mentor and friend to Josephine. "Those kids adore you," he observed, helping her clean up supplies. "They remind me why I loved art in the first place," she replied. Before it became about gallery prestige or investment value, Vincent studied her recent canvas. "Speaking of galleries, my offer stands." "Your work deserves to be seen, Josephine," she hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of exposure." What remained unspoken was her fear, not of failure, but of Oliver somehow finding a way to diminish this hard-won independence. Across the city, Oliver Reed stood at his office window, watching rain streak down the glass. Quantum Sphere's stock had dropped 15% after investigative. Journalists exposed unethical labor practices in their overseas factories, practices Oliver had delegated and ignored. "The board is requesting your presence," his assistant announced from the doorway. The boardroom felt colder than he remembered. Faces that once smiled deferentially now regarded him with carefully masked concern. "The situation has become untenable," Chairwoman Eleanor Walsh stated. "Your leadership has been distracted these past months." "Distracted?" Oliver scoffed. I've been completely focused. Thomas, sitting further down the table, spoke quietly. Your divorce proceedings, the missed meetings, the hostile responses to legitimate ethical concerns, these aren't signs of focus, Oliver. The word divorce still hit like a physical blow. Josephine had been resolute, communicating only through her attorney. The mansion felt cavernous without her presence, each room a reminder of what he'd taken for granted. The board is implementing oversight measures, Eleanor continued. You'll retain your position, but major decisions will require board approval moving forward. Pride made him want to fight, to remind them whose name was on the building. But something else, perhaps the beginning of wisdom, made him nod instead. Later, alone in the mansion, Oliver wandered into what had once been Josephine's studio. He'd had the staff maintain it exactly as she'd left it, though he couldn't articulate why. Running his fingers over her empty easel, he confronted a truth he'd been avoiding. He missed not just his wife, but the person he'd been when he first met her, before ambition calcified into arrogance. Meanwhile, Josephine finally called Vincent. About that exhibition, I think I'm ready. The unexpected encounter, the prismatic gallery hummed with conversation and the gentle clink of glasses. Tonight marked Josephine Reed's debut exhibition, Emergence, a collection that chronicled her journey from silence to self-expression. Each canvas told a story, of loss, rediscovery, and ultimately hope. Josephine moved through the crowd in a simple blue dress, accepting congratulations with genuine surprise at the turnout. Children from her art classes had come with their families, proudly pointing out their teacher to anyone who would listen. You've created something remarkable, Vincent said, appearing at her side. 3 pieces already sold and Patricia Winters is here. Josephine's eyes widened. Patricia Winters, the tech heiress turned philanthropist, was known for her substantial arts funding. Really? Here for the exhibition? Specifically to meet you, Vincent confirmed. Your community center proposal caught her attention. Across the room, the gallery doors opened, admitting a late arrival who stood motionless just inside the entrance. Oliver Reed, looking both out of place and oddly vulnerable in his perfectly tailored suit, scanned the crowd until his gaze locked with Josephine's. For a moment, the gallery seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them suspended in shared history and separate presence. Josephine felt her heart race, not from longing, but from the sudden realization that she no longer felt diminished by his presence. Oliver hadn't planned to come. He'd seen the exhibition announcement in an arts newsletter he'd started subscribing to, another habit he couldn't explain. Something compelled him forward through the gallery, past canvases that revealed a talent he'd encouraged her to set aside. He stopped before a particularly arresting piece, a woman standing at a crossroads, her shadow not behind but ahead of her, transformed into something larger and more vibrant. The placard read simply, "What remains? It's about what we keep after losing what we thought defined us." Josephine's voice came from behind him. Oliver turned. Up close, the changes in her were even more evident. Not just the confident posture or the paint smudge on her wrist, but a fundamental shift in how she occupied space. "Josephine, he began, but was interrupted by a commanding voice. "Ms. Reed." The woman of the hour. Patricia Winters, elegant in her 60s, approached with Vincent. "Your work is extraordinary." Josephine thanked her while Oliver stood awkwardly to the side, suddenly conscious of his irrelevance in this moment. "But I'm even more impressed by your community initiative," Patricia continued. "Art education for underserved youth is exactly what my foundation prioritizes. I'd like to fully fund your proposal for the Community Arts Center." The surrounding conversations quieted as witnesses registered the significance of the announcement. Applause broke out, led enthusiastically by Josephine's students. Oliver watched as Josephine's face transformed with genuine joy, the same expression he'd seen years ago when she'd first shown him her art, before he'd taught her to value only what impressed others. In that moment, surrounded by people who valued what he had dismissed as frivolous, Oliver Reed understood the true cost of his arrogance. Bridges and new foundations autumn painted the city in amber and gold as construction crews transformed the abandoned warehouse into the Reed Winters Community Art Center. Large windows now punctuated the brick facade, designed to flood the interior with natural light. Inside, spacious studios took shape alongside exhibition spaces and classrooms. Josephine supervised the installation of adjustable easels, her clipboard filled with notes and sketches. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind since Patricia Winter's announcement, with architects, contractors, and curriculum planners all seeking her input. "Ms. Josie," Daniel called, racing through the doorway with his mother following. Other children from her classes had begun arriving for the pre-opening tour she'd promised them. "Is this really going to be our art place?" "It is," she confirmed, bending to his level. "And you helped design it, remember? Those windows were your idea." As Josephine led the children through the space, describing future programs and watching their eyes widen with possibilities, she didn't immediately notice the figure standing quietly at the entrance. Oliver waited until the tour concluded before approaching. 3 months had changed him too. His designer suit replaced by more casual attire, his expression less guarded. "It's impressive," he offered, gesturing to the space. "You've created something important here." Josephine studied him, noting the absence of the condescension that had once colored their interactions. "Thank you. Patricia's foundation made it possible." "Actually," Oliver hesitated, "I came to give you this." He handed her an envelope. "It's not a reconciliation attempt," he added quickly, seeing her wariness. "It's the documentation for an educational endowment. Anonymous, managed independently from me. It ensures the center's programs will be funded permanently." Josephine opened the envelope, scanning the documents with surprise. "Why?" "Because you were right and I was wrong." The words seemed to cost him something, but he continued. "Not just about the center, but about what matters. About who I became." They walked together through the space, maintaining a careful distance that acknowledged both their shared past and separate futures. "I'm establishing a tech education foundation," Oliver explained. "Focusing on ethics alongside innovation, teaching what I should have remembered myself." Outside, they paused on the steps. The neighborhood stretched before them, not the struggling area it had once been, but a community beginning to revitalize, partly due to Josephine's efforts. "I never apologized properly," Oliver said finally, "not for the humiliation at our anniversary, or for the years of dismissing what mattered to you." "I'm sorry, Josephine." She nodded, accepting his words without need for elaboration. "We both lost ourselves in different ways. I'm finding my way back. It seems you might be too." A group of children raced past, laughing as they chased fallen leaves. Josephine and Oliver watched them, two people who had once shared everything and now shared only this moment of understanding. "The center opens next week," Josephine said. "You're welcome to attend if you'd like." "As a guest, not as a sponsor," Oliver clarified. "This is your achievement, not mine." As they parted ways, Oliver toward the waiting car that would take him to his new downtown apartment. Josephine back to the community she'd helped nurture. Neither felt the need for dramatic goodbyes or promises of future contact. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, but new foundations could still be laid. Sometimes the greatest fortune wasn't measured in wealth, but in the courage to begin again, in the humility to acknowledge mistakes, and in the strength to create meaning from what remains after everything else falls away. Inside the nearly completed art center, Josephine's newest canvas stood on an easel by the window, two separate paths winding through a forest, occasionally visible to each other across a ravine, never converging but both leading toward the same light.